Why hello there internet, I'm CST from the Guild of Awesome, and today I'm reviewing the remake of Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 4. Now I love Final Fantasy VII. I love the original, I love Crisis Core, and I liked Advent Children. So when they actually announced a remake of the original game, I was both really excited and kind of skeptical. I still haven't forgiven Square Enix for Final Fantasy XIII, and it didn't help that the gameplay looks so similar to that trilogy of trash. However, after completing the remake, it's goddamn incredible. So close to a 10 out of 10, but with just some big problems holding it back. First off, it's not made for newcomers. Things from the original game get shown to the player, but nothing gets explained, so only people who have played the old games would actually know what they have just seen. A lot of the story has been changed significantly, and a lot of it is for the better. So alongside recreating the original story and expanding a crap ton upon it, in such a great and actually kind of respectful way, they have added an additional overall story that's weaved into the original. After completing the game, I actually really hated this new story that they have added. I did begin to hate it a little bit less, and I actually do admit that it does have a ton of potential. The remake only covers the Midgar section of the original game, which was only 4 to 6 hours long. This remake took me 35 hours to complete, and that was with me exploring and doing all of the side content. They have expanded on so much content from the original story in such a great way. Sections that took only minutes in the old game can now take hours. There was a danger of padding for it being stretched out so long, and I definitely felt that in the late game. It started to feel like the game was slamming on the brakes in 2 or 3 sections. But overall, the expanded content is done masterfully, and it feels like the content would fit right at home if it was in the original. Every character is now fully voice acted. As a fan of the franchise, I was a little disappointed that most of the voice actors have not returned, but the actors that have taken over do a fantastic job. It also really shows how voice actors can really bring these characters to life. The dialogue has been completely rewritten, and it's done really, really well. Each character has depth to them, and over the course of just this game alone, which really is just the introduction, characters have a lot of development. Let's just take Cloud and Barret for example. Barret starts off as this guy who's an asshole to Cloud because he thinks Cloud is this cold-hearted mercenary. And in his defense, that's what Cloud wants people to think about him. But as Cloud becomes friends with Barret and his group, he shows that he's not as heartless as he wants people to think he is.
I'll do it for 3 gil.
Huh?
I'm offering a special discount right now on Toad King jobs. Looks like it's your lucky day.
And so, over the course of the game, Barret's and Cloud's attitudes towards each other changes. And unlike the original game, I actually felt the friendship between these 2 characters. And everyone else for that matter. Everyone feels more fleshed out than they were in the original, especially side characters. Also, like the original, there are a mix of serious and silly moments throughout the game. This remake does a really good job of making you smile during those silly bits, and making you tense or sad during the serious moments. There's an event that happens that was in the original game, and the remake really makes you feel this event more. It shows you how it affects the characters more, and that makes such a larger impact on you than it did in the original. Now, I'm not going to go any further into the story to avoid spoilers, but overall, it's really good, and the great thing about it is because so much has been changed, it doesn't make the original obsolete. Now let's dive into the gameplay. So I said I was worried about this because it looks like the same battle system as Final Fantasy XIII, and what they have done here is copy the same system from Final Fantasy XIII, but make it work really well. Now, it's no longer turn-based like the original. Everyone has compared the gameplay to Kingdom Hearts, and I think that's kind of wrong. I don't think it's anything like Kingdom Hearts. So let's break it down. Each character has a basic attack. These attacks do very little damage, but it's strong enough to take out the weaker enemies you encounter. Each character only has 1 combo they can do using this basic attack, and each character also has an alternative attack. Cloud will change his stance so that he attacks stronger and faster, but moves slower. He can also be knocked out of this stance. Barret can use a charge shot, but once it's been used, he'll need to charge it up again before he can use it. Tifa has a powerful uppercut, and Aerith has a magical version of Barret's charge shot. While fighting, you can move around freely, you can block and dodge roll to avoid damage. You have a gauge at the bottom called ATB. This fills slowly over time, but gets filled faster by attacking or blocking. When this bar gets filled, you can use abilities, spells, and items. When selecting stuff from the menu, time slows to a halt, giving you time to think about what your next move's going to be. Basically, this is just a modernised version of the old turn-based system. It works really, really damn well. So the basic attacks I mentioned earlier do so little damage, but the abilities that you get that you use with ATB do a significant amount of damage. So I imagine it like the basic attacks are just there to keep you entertained while the ATB bar fills. and you use your ATB abilities just like you would do as a normal attack in the old game. You can only control one character at a time, but you can swap between the characters on the fly during battle. If the character you're playing as gets downed in a fight, then you can just swap to another character. You can also set shortcuts for your own character's abilities, and set shortcuts for the other character's abilities. So if I'm playing as Cloud, I can set shortcuts for Tifa abilities so I don't have to swap to her to use her abilities. Saying that, you don't have to swap to another character to use their abilities. Once you're in the ATB menu, you can just swap to another character right then and there without actually swapping characters. So unlike Final Fantasy XIII, you have a lot of control over your AI teammates. People have criticised the AI's behaviour, it's not that good, and to be honest, I'll agree with that. I really think they could have done with the Gambit system from Final Fantasy XII, which basically allowed you to build the AI from the ground up. Or even just selecting the character to be aggressive or defensive, stuff like that would have been very useful. Limits have returned as well. These are special abilities that your characters can use after they've received a certain amount of damage. They look awesome and they do a crap ton of damage. Summons have also returned, however this time they appear only after a certain criteria has been met, like if a character reaches low HP, or if an enemy has been staggered. I'll talk about staggering shortly. Once a summon appears, they fight as an AI teammate for a set amount of time. You can also use your ATB bar to use special abilities with each summon. Once the time limit has run out, the summon will leave, but not before using a powerful ability. The stagger system has carried over from Final Fantasy XIII, but like I said, it's done really well here. Attacking an enemy will build their stagger meter. Once an enemy has been staggered, you'll do a crap ton more damage to them while they're in this state. Every single enemy, and especially bosses, have a weakness that you can exploit. So for example, an enemy can be weak to a certain element, or if you attack them at certain times, or even if you block or dodge roll some of their attacks. Once you exploit their weakness, they enter a pressured state. During this state, the enemy is typically stunned and can't damage you. They also receive more stagger damage in this state. The problem Final Fantasy XIII had is that eventually, every single enemy required to be staggered, making every fight a chore. In this game, however, it works really well. Not only being able to take out weaker enemies with just basic attacks, but adding enemy weaknesses makes fights really satisfying as you exploit those weaknesses. I've heard other YouTubers say that they felt the enemies have too much HP, and being the equivalent of bullet sponges. But I disagree, except for bosses. But even then, fights are built around this exploitation system, so just brute forcing your way through with just basic attacks will take forever. There is also a problem where you can be under-equipped to deal with some bosses. For example, let's take Hell House, which is a boss people either hate or love. I love this boss fight, but I had a hard time with it, because I only had one magic spell equipped, making the fight take 4 times longer than it should have been. If I had more spells equipped, then it would have been faster. So I don't really hold this against the game, as I really should have equipped more spells by this point. The game is also quite forgiving. If you die during a battle, you can just restart from that fight, or even from a bit before that fight. This allows you to change your equipment if you enter the fight which you know you're going to struggle with because you do not have the right abilities equipped. One small problem I have with the combat in this game is aerial combat. This problem exists because it expects you to use spells or ranged combat against flying enemies. The problem is you can't jump manually. So when you're playing as a melee character, you have to hope that they jump up and get within range of the flying enemy. Overall, the combat is really satisfying to play and looks really flashy. The boss fights in particular are fun and well designed. Typically, each boss goes through 2 or 3 different stages that requires you to do different tactics each time. Every character has unique abilities, and they can learn more over the course of the game. Each weapon they get has a unique ability. Once the character has used that ability 10 times with that weapon, that allows you to use that ability with every weapon. Speaking of weapons, there is a new weapon upgrade system. So every time you level up, you gain SP points. You can then use these points to level up your weapons. Again, this system looks a lot like Final Fantasy XIII's level up system, but also here it is done better. First off, the SP points are used individually per weapon. So if I get 5 SP points for Cloud, then I can go into each of Cloud's weapons individually and spend 5 points. And it's also stored for new weapons. So if I get a new weapon late in the game, I'll get to spend all of the SP points I've gathered up to that point on this new weapon as well. This is a really good system. It's not just stat buffs here, it's also different abilities, and allowing you to equip more abilities and spells. The beauty of this system is that it makes it so old weapons don't really become obsolete, as they are being upgraded alongside your new weapons. So all the weapons may come around to becoming the most useful ones later on. You can also be quite strategic here as well, like saving your points to spend on better abilities. Equipping weapons and armor isn't just about increasing your stats, but they also have slots that you can put magic and abilities into. So managing your spells and abilities is a huge deal, as you need to have the right ones equipped to exploit enemy weaknesses properly. The game's map has been greatly expanded, especially the towns, as now they are filled with buildings and people, whereas in the old games, these huge towns would have taken up just 1 or 2 screens. There are a lot of places to explore, even if you only get a few chances to actually do so. There are now side quests for you to complete, and a handful of mini-games to play that help expand the playtime while keeping you entertained. The game's graphics are downright beautiful, but they do have a huge problem. First off, the skyboxes look terrible. They are really pixelated and look like the sort of thing you would see in a game from 10 years ago. It's a strange thing to say, but there is sometimes a lot of detail in these backgrounds, but they all look 2D, they all look low resolution. They look like just a JPEG in the sky. And speaking of low resolutions, the biggest problem I had with the graphics is that there are these really ugly, low resolution textures everywhere. And I'm not talking about textures popping in. That happens and that's fine. They usually only happen in large areas, like the cities. But every 15 minutes or so, there is a texture that looks like trash. And it gets really distracting. And the problem is made even worse because everything else in the game, especially the character models, looks goddamn outstanding. There is so much detail in the faces and the facial expressions are spot on. There are a few points in the game where I actually just stopped to admire the beauty of what's being shown to me. In terms of presentation and animations, it's some of the best I've seen in any game for a long time. But because the graphics overall are outstanding, when you see something ugly, it really sucks you out of the experience. They did manage to perfectly capture the style and aesthetic of the old game, while managing to expand and add detail to the environments. I should mention I played this game on a PlayStation 4 Pro. The game runs at 4K with HDR, frame rate stayed at a steady 60 FPS, even when there was a lot happening on screen. The soundtrack is incredible. They took every song from the old game, which also has one of the best soundtracks ever made, and remixed each song like 2 or 3 times. All the songs have been modernized, and besides from the Chocobo rap, I loved every single one of them. And because they remixed the battle and boss themes several different ways, the battle music never gets old. The price is £60 on the PlayStation Store. I'd say it's worth that price. Don't forget that the Resident Evil 3 remake is £50 and is only 3 to 4 hours long, while this Final Fantasy VII remake is around £30. I do not recommend the deluxe edition. That's the one I bought and I regret it. It's an extra £15. You get an art book, which is cool, and you get 2 summons, which I found kind of worthless. Overall, this game is fantastic. They've done such an amazing job not just remaking Final Fantasy VII, but expanding on it so much that it can stand on its own, regardless if it's not entirely faithful to the original. It neither sits in the original shadow or outshines it. I'll give this game a 9 out of 10. It's so damn close to being a 10 out of 10, but really it was a padding near the end of the game that got to me, that made it feel like I was just forcing my way through the game and I wasn't having any fun. The low resolution textures issue, although technically not a huge problem, it is really distracting and kept taking me out of the game. I highly recommend playing the original first if you haven't. Not only is it one of the best games ever made, but it will help you understand parts of this remake. You know, I'm torn between part of me wanting an exact remake of Final Fantasy VII just with modern graphics, but also loving what we have gotten with this remake. I hope eventually it gets released for the PC. Maybe the texture problem could be fixed by then, and I can't imagine what modders would do with this. What I do worry about is how long it's going to take them to remake the full game. But also the game is masterfully crafted. They have obviously spent a ton of effort and time into making this game look fantastic. And if they did that for the rest of the games, it's going to take them forever to develop them. My money's on that it'll take at least a decade before we see the final game in this series come out. And I also have questions like, will I be able to carry over my character's equipment and abilities over to the next game? Will they add new spells in the next games? Because by the end of this game, you have most of the spells from the original. So I am quite worried about the next games that come out for this remake. It's going to be interesting to see if they can hold up this level of quality in the other games. That's all from me. Thanks for watching and stay awesome.